It is usually said that a good practice in conference talks is to start with a question relevant to the audience profile that will slowly bring you to the presentation topic. So here we are today in TestCon, in a conference about software quality assurance. And I decided to start with a question totally relevant to testing and quality assurance. How many of you like J.R.R. Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings? Raise one hand if you like it. Raise both hands if you are a true fan of it. Nice. Now, regardless if you like it or not, I hope that you will all agree that it gets really interesting when real-life scenarios tend to resemble these fairy tales like Lord of the Rings. Magical unexpectancy and lessons learned and morals to keep are eventually even better when they are not just derived from fairy tales, but they're from real-life examples. My name is Sakis Ladopoulos. I know it's Greek to you because it is indeed Greek, and I'm here today with you to tell you a story of this kind. It is a story of a test team's unexpected journey from Waterfall to Agile, and a few steps back, finding their middle ground, their middle earth, in their proprietary test shire. It is the story of how independent testing approach diminished, close to become obsolete, but rose up again to find a new scope and a new meaning within a software house. It is a story of a team of testers who were lost in Agile translation, but they found dad, not their father, but DAD, Disciplined Agile Delivery, that is, and through DAD, a new refined identity for them. It is my personal story of how I almost lost my job before several years, having my role as a test manager threatened with extinction, but it turned out to have every test manager's dream coming true. I had great insight to the quality of what was supposed to be delivered to the test team before even delivery, and thus I had a great and very robust way to be able to actually plan for what should be tested before knowing the actual issues before even delivered to testing. Last but probably foremost, it is a very interesting experience how a software house answered the mother of all questions when it comes to organize functions. Should functions work united or should work decoupled, which is pretty much the same question encrypting the same underlying dilemma, only seen from a methodological perspective when we ask Waterfall or Agile. So I keep saying about a story, and I mention about fictionary stories like Lord of the Rings. Is it a true story? Well, most things happened exactly as will be told. Some things could have happened as will be told, regardless if they did or not. It is, as they say in Hollywood, based on a true story. A grand deviation is that in stories, apparently we should have an end and a conclusion and probably a morale to keep. In reality, we never just live happily ever after. In reality, we always face new challenges, we always have new changes and new things to deal with. And last but most important for me, allow me a disclaimer so as to secure my paycheck at the end of the month. This story has nothing to do with my current employer. So let's start. And how all stories start. Once upon a time, there was a software house with a test team, and following the old-fashioned classic bureaucratic way of processes called Waterfall. The model was ruling all activities. Analysis, development, and testing were three distinguished functions staffed through different members of each and every team. Every team was expecting the previous one to finish, so as to take the output of the previous team as input for the next and proceed with their work, pretty much like a production line process. This software house was generally very well reputed because it was delivering on time and with quality, at least in most of the cases and most of the time. Still, the bureaucratic way of working as imposed by the waterfall processes didn't leave any flexibility to this software house so as to be able to deal with changes, scope changes or changes in general. Well-defined and clearly established projects were dealt very, very good from this software house. Projects within dynamic environments and within continuous change were considered as being a nightmare in which a well-reputed software house should not deal with. So in the unfortunate case that we had such a project who had continuous change, the only thing that we knew that we could do is just to kill it, to burn it with the minimum losses for the software house, even if that meant that we should accept some losses. Apparently, and due to this way of working of this software house was really in front of large framework contracts, usually taken by national administrations or public institutions. And these type of customers were really fond of this software house as they were working pretty much in the same manner. So yeah, even though the costs were very high and the contribution margin was minimum, probably zero sometimes, this software house continued to work considerably well. Well, that's as they call the scenery set, and everything works fine. And in every story there is always a twist. One day, one usual, probably not so sunny day, a big and unexpected announcement was made by the upper management for an imposed organizational change. There was a storm of an unmanaged change with uncalculated risks that was coming to rule our shire, our software house. Who was the bearer of this change is of no importance. The change itself, which I will call the ring, in this case for obvious reasons, I guess, was called Agile processes. The bearers said that we should leave behind the old-fashioned processes that we were following, like Waterfall, and we should ride the wave of the new era of methodologies. Methodologies that were promising for flexibility, adaptability, and in general the ability to deal with unforeseen changes, exactly the thing that we were missing. The bearer said nothing about the hazards of the naive use of the ring. Probably the bear himself couldn't understand that these precious new processes could destroy even him. From a moment to the next, everything that we were doing, everything that we were dealing with was treated as cursed and transformed to the scapegoat of all evil. Some had reservations with this change, some had great concerns, and personally I was fighting back as much as I could. To my great frustration and disappointment, I soon realized that there is no point to try to discuss about risks and alternatives and such things for a decision already taken from the upper management. I even once got the answer, don't worry, you will not be disappeared, probably you could work as a Scrum Master, for example. So it was evident that there was no room for different opinions. Whoever had a different opinion was treated like if he was opposing the new vision and the new mission of the company. So some, they were trying to see how they would fit in their new funky agile costumes. Some others were ready to pack their old-fashioned three-piece suit and leave. Everyone was trying to deal with this change, either taking it or leaving it. At the point where no return was visible, an unforeseen ally suddenly appeared. An ally that erroneously and erroneously enough was not initially considered as a stakeholder to this whole change endeavor, but it turned out to have a major say in this transformation project. This ally was our dear and beloved set of existing customers. It seems that over the year we choose customers and customers choose us for how we consider things, for our ethics and our culture. We choose customers, we choose partners in general who look and feel like us, even if we think of them as being golems in case that the partnership does not go that well. We prefer our customers, and customers, most important, preferred us not only for what we deliver, but for how we deliver things, how we are working, what are our processes. And it's a very simple reason for that, because they resemble us. They use the same processes as well. Old-fashioned processes, bureaucratic processes, means national administrations, unfortunately, and public institutions. So apparently the customers that we had after all these years were the ones that were following exactly the same processes with us. And obviously they were really reluctant about this forthcoming change in our software house. It was only then, because customer is always right, so it was only at this point where the organization decided to reconsider this decision. It was not anymore an imposed change coming from the top towards the rest of the company, but more like a request for proposals, I would say, more like a room to consider alternatives to see how we could improve. So in a sense, we try to soften our approach, always trying to find a better way to work. So we decided to consider how we go forward, but accepting and expecting that any change will not interfere with ongoing work, will remain transparent to our end customers so as not to have any issue with what we were doing currently. After several discussions, brainstorms, committees, agreements and disagreements of the Greek kind, which, believe me, it's not the best thing that you can imagine, we end up with a consensus of some basic things. The one was that, okay, indeed we should follow an agile methodology. And the perfect for our case was Scrum. So the development process from now on would be Scrum, as it seems to provide the level of flexibility that we were missing, the level of adaptability that we needed to have. However, an agile methodology, and Scrum in this case per se, could be very good for the development, but on its own, if we think a delivery scenario, be it a service or a project, is a bit naked. It does not provide the tools that we need so as to be able to start from scratch and deliver something till the end. So in order to frame the whole end-to-end process, something like an encapsulation of the development process, Scrum in this case, was needed to make sure that we will leave our interfaces toward the customer intact. Having said all that, we created a proprietary process, which we used to call hybrid agile. It was a hybrid schema where Scrum was selected for the development process, but it was encapsulated by a service delivery process who was more like taking care of an initiation, let's say, part, and a release delivery part of the project. It was Scrum encapsulated in something like Waterfall. Scrumfall was a name that was, fortunately enough, we didn't use. This is a schematic of the process that I'm trying to explain, probably better with pictures. You'll see that we had Scrum Teams, being the agile development process, encapsulated by initiation phase and transition phase, giving us also the possibility to fork a project to several different Scrum teams and be able to dispatch different parts of a project to different Scrum teams, and then be able to join them all together in the transition phase and have one output for a big project out of many Scrum teams. Customer interfaces was pretty much intact in a sense that before they were also seeing an initiation phase and the corresponding roles, along with the transition phase with the corresponding roles at the end. So that was our fine idea, the proprietary process. And all this was created before several years now. I think it was 2013, only 1 year after Mr. Ambler Scott has published DAD, a practitioner's guide to agile software delivery in the enterprise. This is what was used to call back in these years a second generation of agile processes. And long story short, because pretty much I have already told the same thing, Scott Ambler was describing an iterative process within development that was encapsulated by an inception phase and a transition phase. Imagine that. We have reinvented the wheel. At least in this case, we were feeling confident that we were in the right direction, since someone else has already published a book with a very similar idea. So just to give you the corresponding schematic from Scott Ambler, of course more sophisticated, but the main idea, the rough idea, is pretty much the same thing. An iterative process in the development level could be Scrum, could be anything iterative, which has an inception phase and a transition phase, mainly to secure the appropriate delivery towards the customer and to be able to fork large projects into different Scrum teams. So pretty much the same idea with the one that we thought that it was our own. That was the overall software development lifecycle process. What all this meant for testing. Testing in Waterfall. It's a different phase with specific actions that are undertaken by a specific team. It's like a mini organization within an organization. Testing in Agile, exactly the opposite. We have a continuous activity in parallel with everything else. Testing starts from the very beginning of the whole life cycle and goes along with the flow of everything else. It's governed by processes. We all know what we have to do. There may be flavorings in our engineers, some more test-oriented, some less, but we expect everyone to test. Quality assurance in Agile is the responsibility of everyone. That's one of the main things. So two very, very different views of what testing means and how testing is implemented in an organization. Having a hybrid schema, how we can combine these two different things. Well, in our case, turned out that the testing didn't only cease to exist, but it had an empowered role in the new format, as it was more like acting as center of competence, providing the same services as before, functional acceptance testing, but also tools, methodology, processes, in a sense, a consulting role for everyone else within the company based on the needs. Come on. Again, the same schematic with our process. If we are to envision where the testing lies in this process, it's, let's say, a glue between the the development processes and the transition phase. So it has the one leg, let's say, within the development process, the other leg in the service delivery process. Let's zoom in this part and understand a bit better how this works. We have now testers being part of the Scrum teams, embedded fully within the development process. We also keep an independent testing team approach within the transition phase. All testers are members of one functional team under the same management. And one of the main important things that the management has to do in this case is to make sure that we have a continuous rotation and no one is left for too much in a Scrum team and practically being fully absorbed by the Scrum process, or left too much in the independent testing team without understanding what the development team does and how it works. What was the result of it? We had added value both to projects but also for the test team as well. We had a great win-win situation. we managed to have a smoother internal transition from development to test. Finally, no one was throwing over the fence code or RPMs or deliverables. Thus, we had less risks, minimization of delays, and after all, probably the issue of every test manager, no surprises. We knew what we were expecting, having testers, having ambassadors, if you'd like, from the test team within the Scrum teams, knowing what is going on from the very beginning of a sprint, for example, and thus be able to understand what will come afterwards. And also, being not in our small test shire and having, let's say, the flag, I am a tester, I'm a developer, which usually means I'm not a tester, we had a greater consensus of testing practices. Everyone was now accepting the idea that quality assurance is a distributed responsibility. Everyone should test, and they were coming to us to see how they could do that, what tools could use, and so on, so forth. What was also very good for the test team is that the visibility didn't only improved the project delivery, but also our lives as a test team. We would be able to plan better our work. We knew what we should expect, so our test plans was not just a theory, it was something really tangible and tailored, if you like, to the actual needs of the incoming package. We had better technical awareness because we had finally testers working hand by hand with developers within the Scrum team, and great variety of test positions and different flavorings of testing. So our test team had room for any type of, let's say, flavors of tester. Purely business-oriented testers who are only seeing the end product, and also testers with more technical chops who are more into developing automation stuff and these things. So, is that all? Is that just a happy ending of the story? Of course not. As I said initially, in reality, things are constantly moving, evolving, new issues rise up, new difficulties to overcome. After these years, we still have some hiccups in this whole process. I have pointed out just 3 here. By no means do I imply that we have only 3 issues. Testers, in some cases, are unwilling to change hats and work as cross-functional engineers in a Scrum team. Practically, this means that, so as not to blame only development, it's sometimes difficult for us to understand how developers work. It is difficult for us to go into the notion that we do not care of what an application is doing, but also how it is created, how it is implemented. Another thing is that Scrum teams want to keep their tester, especially if they're doing a very good job, forever. It's within the nature of a Scrum team to be very centralized. So if they're working together, they don't see the reason, the value, let's say, of rotating people. Still, it's something very useful for the whole organization. And we have managed to make things a bit more complex in terms of lines of reporting. Now our organization chart is not that much of a chart, but more like a spaghetti, having several different lines of management. Still, it works well. Still, we can consider this change as a success. But the most important thing about a transformation endeavor, about a change project, is not necessarily the final outcome, but what we learned during this trip. One thing that we learned is we should go with the flow, but beware. Trends, technology trends, processes as trends in this case, may wash you, and eventually your business may wash your business away. Process, as other things as well, tend to follow a cycle, which I describe here as born, hyped, everyone is talking about them, we use buzzwords all the time, used, misused, we don't really know why we use them, and probably we don't use them for the right reason, fought, and finally burned, like the witches. And only afterwards we can say, well, probably she wasn't a witch. We should let this cycle work, and only once the dust settles, we can really evaluate every new big thing. Every new big thing starts as a new big thing. We don't know how good is it actually till we see it working. It's like the ones that are rushing to buy the new, I don't want to say specific Samsung or Apple or whatever. I just said that. And when you buy a new mobile phone, you probably are more like a beta user of it. It's wiser to leave a few months pass by, make sure that all bugs are okay, and then go and buy that. By the way, probably it's going to be cheaper as well. If you are an early adopter, then eventually you have to do with all the bugs and all the issues of an early adopter. It's like being a beta user in processes. Another thing that we learned the hard way, the very hard way, do not reinvent the wheel. There is knowledge out there that you can explore and exploit. Still, there is no off-the-shelf product that can take care custom needs. Processes are not a product. We shouldn't really talk about things that are labeled in a very specific way. Scrum, Kanban, XP, or anything else. The industry tends to package processes as products for various reasons, because it's more easy to identify them. Probably it's then a more marketing thing, because behind the process that is packaged as a product, we also have trainings and certifications that all this cost money and so on and so forth. Still, they are not products. It's just ideas that we should explore, and things that we can cherry pick from here and there. We can take a little bit of Scrum, we can take a little bit of something else and make our own thing that works for our own proprietary needs. Do not expect ever that the right answer is going to be black or white, waterfall or agile. In most of the cases, the right answer is going to be something in between, a shade of gray. There are innumerous shades of gray. And most of us, we are in a shade of gray, probably almost white, probably almost black, but it is hardly ever the case that you will find your answer in waterfall only, or Scrum only, black or white. And last, but probably the most important, as a byproduct of this whole process, enforcement in an organization and in general comes in a top-down direction. Someone from the upper management says something and must occur. Commitment, though, is gained only with a bottom-up engagement. And only if you have an organization engaged in something, you can have success. It's pretty much like a conference talk. It's the same thing. I can stand here and say something valuable, hopefully, or talk nonsense. But if you are not engaged, if you're just sleeping after our lunch, then it's a failure in any case. If I manage to make you feel engaged and hear, then probably there is a possibility that you will have something to take away with you. And remember how I started. I made a question. Why? Because I was expecting an answer. Why? So as for you to participate, to be member in this thing, so as hopefully to be engaged, because only through engagement we can have success, and I hope that I managed to do that with you today. Thank you.